Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. Most of the work on the state budget is done now, and it looks like Governor Walker got almost everything he wanted. We'll talk about whether or not that is a good thing. A new study says blacks and whites smoke pot at about the same rate, but that way more blacks than whites get arrested. Why? We'll talk about that. The Supreme Court says, yes, it is okay to take a DNA sample from someone who is a suspect in a serious crime. And we'll also talk about Ryan Braun back in the middle of this performance-enhancing drug controversy. All right, let me introduce everybody who's here today. We have Joel McNally, longtime newspaper columnist. Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. And Denise Callaway, community affairs and public relations professional. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's talk first about the state budget. The package has been approved by the Joint Finance Committee, and both the Senate and Assembly are expected to pass it as well. Public schools get more money, taxes go down, the voucher school program gets expanded statewide, municipalities are forced to do away with any residency requirements. Do you expect, Kevin, any big surprises in the next few weeks as this winds its way to the end?
I don't, because let's face it, the Republicans control everything. So you may see some minute changes because politicians don't want to just rubber stamp. You might see some small changes when it goes to the Assembly first. And then it'll go over to the Senate, and because both houses have to approve the very same budget document before it goes to the governor's office, I think the Senate will more or less approve whatever the Assembly jettisons over there. And then the question is, what does the man who has one of the most powerful veto pens in the country do? He's playing his cards close to the vest. He might make some vetoes. He might. I don't have any inside information on this, but he might make some changes about the bail bondsman issue, for example, about the journalism school that got booted out of UW. There could be some changes there, but I think overall, I think you said it right. It's look, any budget, none of them are perfect. There's always going to be people that don't like some of the provisions in the state budget. But I like this. It's taxpayer friendly, $1 billion in tax relief. It's the largest tax relief package in the state budget since 1999. There's an increase in aid to public schools. The choice expansion was not what I wanted to see. It's not really an expansion at all, but who knows? Let's see what he does with that. But overall, the governor set forth the budget, and he's getting most, if not all of it, right back.
Denise, a lot of Democrats are saying that what this legislature did was take a horrible budget that Walker introduced and made it even worse.
Well, I certainly think that not everyone feels the way Kevin does about the fact that this is
this program.
A great budget. It's what's great about America, Kevin, that everyone feels that this is a great budget that is as helpful, perhaps, as Kevin has indicated. So, for example, when we take a look at public schools, yes, there is more money than the $50 per pupil that Governor Walker put there, but the $300 is less than the rate of inflation. And it comes at a point of a time when the previous budget, public schools in the state of Wisconsin suffered the biggest decrease ever in state funding. So kids are getting $300 more over the biennium per kid over the biennium of the budget. But that's after, in the last biennium, $555 per student was slashed from aid to schools. So it's more than what was going to be under Governor Walker, but it still doesn't even reach and match the rate of inflation. There are some things that I agree that will probably go through without any difficulty, but already Republicans in the Senate are talking about the concerns that they have about the expansion of vouchers. Several of them have said they're concerned that it puts us down a path where we have two publicly funded systems when, quite frankly, we are struggling to adequately support the one public system that we have. And I certainly hope that the governor would take a look at what the Republicans did as payback to the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism. And I want to disclose that I once sat on their board that has angered both people on the left and the right. But most recently, apparently, its mistake was just 2 weeks before this action was taken in the dark of night. They reported on the fact that a number of Republican legislators had received large donations from voucher school supporters. And what a surprise, something that wasn't even on the radar now becomes, they move to take this journalism school, which actually, or this journalism program, which actually spends a significant amount of its time training the next generation of investigative journalists, and it punishes it. It slaps it on the wrist for doing exactly what we expect journalists to do, which is to report on issues that sometimes are difficult for some politicians to read, but necessary information for us to have as a public.
Can I just, for 5 seconds?
Yeah.
If I had a chance to talk to my good friend Scott Walker, I would tell him, take a good look at that provision, because really, that comes across looking as petty and vindictive, and it's a lose-lose for Republicans. He had no idea. A lot of people had no idea that was coming in, and I think he should give serious thought about vetoing that part of the budget.
Were you surprised that the Joint Finance Committee, like so many other things in the last few years, it's Democrats vote against it, Republicans vote for it, straight party line?
Well, it's because Republicans have no morals.
Oh, come on.
I mean, look at it, Kevin. For you to suggest that was somehow a real bizarre thing for them to do, to attack those journalists, is just absurd. The whole problem with having no checks and balances on the state level is shown by that kind of pettiness, that kind of meanness. Boy, another thing that came out of the blue was to reinstate in the state of Wisconsin one of the sleaziest programs they could try to put into our government related to the criminal justice system, to have bail bondsmen preying on poor people and then busting down their doors. I mean, we got away from the bail bond system, because we had some intelligent leadership among both Republicans and Democrats in this state. And no one in the criminal justice system wants to bring that sleazy system back. Do you know why it was brought back? Because they had the same lobbyists working for them who also were working for the rent-to-own industry to cut out some of those regulations, so that other people can prey on poor people. When you don't have checks and balances, and when the Republicans are going to vote straight party line no matter how disgusting the program is, that's what you end up with. Denise pointed out that the money they've restored doesn't begin to restore the huge cuts that we suffered, and now they're even taking away the progressive income tax system. Kevin boasted about income tax relief. Almost $1 billion, 2/3 of which goes to the wealthiest people in this state.
We pay the most taxes.
Not to the people who need it.
They deserve it. They in the middle class
they
deserve
make
it.
more money, and they should pay more money. They should not have to.
That's why they and the middle class should get a break.
The middle class doesn't get a break in this budget.
Right,
they get $100.
Next topic. The American Civil Liberties Union released a nationwide study this week that claims while blacks and whites both use marijuana at about the same rate nationally, blacks are nearly 4 times more likely than whites to be arrested for it. 6 times more likely here in Wisconsin. Now, is that because the cops are racist and like to arrest blacks, or is it because pot-smoking blacks are more likely than pot-smoking whites, Denise, to come in contact with the police? I mean, realistically,
I think what it shows.
You say all of the above?
Well, yeah, I think what that study shows is just something that past studies that have looked at arrest and incarceration rates for people of color, particularly African Americans, but also Latinos, have compared to whites when it comes to drug offenses. African Americans and Latinos in this state, and we didn't need this study to tell us this, are much more likely to be arrested, not only arrested, but arrested, charged, convicted, and to have sentences that are more severe than Caucasians who commit similar offenses. I think what it shows is that in this state in particular, we do have some issues that relate back to racism. We do. And when we take a look at the fact, particularly not in this particular study, but in other studies that have shown for the same offenses, African Americans and Latinos spend more time in jail than people of other races.
But in
it's
every
a problem.
Isn't it true though? In every big city in America, where the urban population is heavy-duty African American, there's a bigger police presence because there's more crime in that area. So you're going to have more traffic stops. You're going to have more expired license plates. You're going to have more people arrested for guns, pot, whatever.
And you're going to have more people stopped and have their pants pulled down and be molested by the police, which would never happen in a white neighborhood, period. The disparities, Denise is absolutely right. The disparities in the criminal justice system, racial disparities on every level. They're more likely to be arrested, they're more likely to be charged, they're more likely to be charged with more serious charges, and they're more likely to be convicted, and then more likely to be sentenced for longer sentences. And everyone in the criminal justice system knows that. Boy, I went through a police training program. Big surprise, huh? They're my best friends. And we had the vice squad people come in and talk about drug arrest. And the first question I asked was, what primarily are people arrested for? And it was overwhelmingly marijuana. Now, believe me, there are serious drug problems in poor communities. There are problems that are destroying those communities.
And in suburban communities as well.
Yeah, and in suburban communities. But I don't think very many people think communities are being destroyed by people smoking pot. They're being destroyed by horrible drug addictions that are destroying families, destroying individuals, and that's the reason we need treatment instead of prison for people with addictions. Not just throw them in prison if they're poor, but put them in rehabilitation with insurance if they're wealthy.
But
the whole idea of the war on drugs is a war on our own citizens, and you don't help anybody by incarcerating them for drug addictions or drug use. What you really need is drug treatment for anybody that needs it, not just the wealthy. The wealthy get it now, but the poor are thrown in prison.
I've even heard Milwaukee Chief Ed Flynn, not exactly a conservative, say many times that if you put more squads in the areas that need more squads where there's high crime, of course you're going to have more African Americans arrested. Is that racist, or is that just the way it is?
I think that's plausible. I think that makes sense. But about the numbers, and I question the source, the ACLU. I mean, their idea of civil liberties is taking away the civil liberties from
the Bill of Rights,
everybody
actually.
else. But having said that,
Pesky Bill of Rights.
having said that, if you'd hear me out, if the numbers are true, they're outrageous, and there's no defense for them. There's 2 counties in Alabama, where 100% of the marijuana arrests were for blacks. You mean to tell me there wasn't one Southern boy smoking pot behind a tree somewhere? Now, again, you have to look, I think, though, beyond just the raw percentages. A retired District of Columbia judge of some 40 years offered some analysis this week and it may not atone for all of the discrepancies, but I think you have to consider it, that blacks using marijuana, it's sort of a case where it's more out in the open as opposed to whites who are doing it in somebody's house or in a basement or even in a private country club. I think you have to consider that. So what do you do about it, all right? What do you do about it? Look.
Decriminalize.
It's still a crime. And I think
not in Washington State and Colorado now.
And they're having problems because of that. But it's a crime mostly everywhere else. And law enforcers it has to be reinforced to them that, look, it is a crime, and not just blacks are committing these crimes. You have to watch out and arrest everyone who commits the crime.
But here's the concern that I have when we say, well, because more police are in poor neighborhoods or high crime neighborhoods, we would expect to see more if there's more arrest. The danger with saying something like that is the assumption that people will make that people who live in these communities, people who are low income or people who live in high crime areas are therefore themselves more likely to commit these kinds of crimes. And that's not correct. I didn't say you were making that assumption, Kevin. I said I think that's...
I'm saying that the odds are greater that they would be arrested because you got more cops swimming around.
The odds are also greater that in the suburban areas, if a high school kid is picked up for pot, he's taken home to his parents. And that doesn't happen in poor communities.
And the other thing is, you can't make the assumption that just because we're taking a look at a higher area of denser population, that you're necessarily going to automatically find more crime. You just can't do that because most of the people who live in these high crime areas and who are the victims of high crime are people of color themselves.
Next topic. Right now, about half the states allow police to collect a DNA sample from someone arrested in connection with a serious crime. The Supreme Court ruled this week by one vote that it's okay. It doesn't violate any rights, and it's not a lot different than taking a mugshot or a fingerprint. But some folks fear this will allow the government to start building the big database, which eventually will include all of us. I know you never liked the idea at all.
Well, and the subject we just talked about, if blacks are more likely to be arrested for anything, we know that black kids growing up in black neighborhoods have trouble avoiding the police and have trouble avoiding being arrested and have trouble avoiding, having criminal records. And it's not because they're more criminal than white kids growing up. But the idea that, I think it's basic in America that unless you're convicted, you're innocent until proven guilty.
But if you can,
and why would you be able to have your own body invaded just because someone picks you up? That doesn't prove anything.
If you can take a swab of somebody's cheek when they're arrested and find out, oh, that person is in the database and committed this rape 5 years ago.
Well, the DNA says
isn't that
they
a
did it.
minimum?
But the DNA was
a
collected
minimal
that.
price for society to pay?
I think what we always have to do in these issues, and that the Supreme Court, I think, showed by the fact that it was a 5-4 split, is that these issues that come to civil liberties and balancing the liberties of an individual with something that may benefit the whole community are really very difficult for us to deal with. I think, as some people have done, and I've heard this from a lot of folks, to say it's no different from a fingerprint or a picture. It is absolutely different from that. The DNA is the essence of who you are. And it is, we can talk about the fact that it's just a swab, it is an invasive effort that's made. I don't have any problem at all with, as part of going through the criminal justice system, for someone who has been convicted of a crime, for the DNA to be gathered. But to me, there are just too many questions about folks who are arrested, never charged. What happens to that DNA then? What happens to that DNA? What kind of safeguards do we have that DNA is used appropriately, that it's stored safely, and that we don't find that 5 years from now, someone who was arrested but never charged, had their DNA swabbed, they apply for some kind of county benefit, and they're like, oh, gee, look at all this stuff we can find out about him from his DNA. We're going to deny the benefit. I think because of what's contained and what you're able to know about a person from their DNA, it's not just their blood type. There's so much more. That this is really problematic for people who've only been arrested.
What about the argument, if you didn't do anything wrong, what do you have anything to worry about?
Bingo!
Yeah.
You know what? If you're a law-abiding citizen, you don't have to be worried about being picked up by some racist cop. You'll be okay. I think this ruling, and by the way, you had a liberal judge. You had a liberal judge also come down in the majority here.
And you had Scalia come down in the minority.
This was in the best interests of justice and public safety. It prevented a known rapist from being released. That's number one. Hey, the Fourth Amendment allows us to take mug shots and fingerprints and blood draws. A DNA sample is far less intrusive than those. It's painful. It's risk-free. And if you can use this tool to find out if an arrestee has maybe committed other crimes, if you can use this tool to exonerate the innocent, if you can use this tool to free someone who was falsely convicted, I think you should definitely use DNA.
I want to talk about those people who were falsely convicted. The National Innocence Project, thank you, has, over the course of about a dozen years, released hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, because the technology that we had at the time, just what you were talking about, Kevin, fingerprints and blood draw. When we looked with more sophisticated information, we found, oh, guess what? That information that we thought was state of the art then is absolutely incorrect with the new data, with the new technology that we have. I'm very concerned that we look at DNA as being the be-all, end-all, and we don't know that there isn't going to be some kind...
At the moment, it is.
Right, but what I'm saying is, What
It
we
is the
said?
Cadillac.
What we said was the Cadillac in the past, and we used to convict people. We found out was not the
Oh,
Cadillac.
so the system worked.
It wasn't.
And-
no,
but
it
this
doesn't.
i- this idea,
the
too,
system
that-
doesn't work for you if you spent 26 years in prison for a crime that you didn't commit.
But this idea,
DNA will prevent.
Do you want to wait? Do you want to wait 26
DNA
years?
will prevent incidents like that you're talking about that don't happen
We don't.
anymore.
We don't know that that's the case. DNA itself is not infallible. We know that,
At the moment, it's the best we got.
but it's not infallible.
All right, let's shift
Well,
gears.
nothing is.
Let's
Okay.
shift
why
gears
we
and
shouldn't
talk
use it.
sports for just a few minutes. Let's talk about Ryan Braun. He's back in the news again with reports that Major League Baseball might be getting ready to suspend a bunch of players who might be implicated by this guy who ran a clinic that handed out performance-enhancing drugs. Does Major League Baseball keep pushing this thing too hard, or is this effort good for the reputation of the game, the good athletes, even though it's hurting the reputation of so many players?
actually, I happened to be at Miller Park on Tuesday night when this story broke. And, suddenly there were TV cameras, there were reporters you never see out of Miller Park descending on Miller Park. And you knew, and the thing was, there was not a bit of news reported that night. You know what was reported that night? ESPN said that this guy had agreed to talk to baseball, the guy who ran the clinic. Talk to Major League Baseball. Well, from that,
basically be given immunity.
From that, ESPN said, well, if he implicates Ryan Braun and 20 other players, Major League Baseball could not only suspend them for 50 games, they could suspend them for 100 games. They took about 10 leaps forward from something that they had no idea what this guy was going to tell Major League Baseball, first of all. And second of all, this guy runs a clinic that everyone claims was sending out drugs. How credible is this guy?
Well, that's the key.
Suddenly they were saying, well, he's a great credible source because whatever he tells Major League Baseball, they're going to suspend these 20 players, some of the best players in the game, for 100 games.
That's the key.
They made it
I could
all
jump in
up.
here.
It's all made up.
Even though he lied for the last years and years.
Well,
and years.
again, for
That's
the fifth time here,
technicality.
that's the key, whether this guy has credible evidence. Because we know this is a witch hunt now. Because,
Yes, it is.
Because Ryan Braun beat the system, all right, and he was exonerated.
And they fired the guy who exonerated him.
Major League Baseball now is out to get Ryan Braun and others because their system, Ryan Braun beat it. So it's a matter of whether this guy has credible evidence or not.
Right.
And for Ryan Braun's sake, I hope he doesn't, because if we find out that Ryan Braun was doing PEDs, then I think he has to suffer the
But
consequences.
the problem is Major League Baseball has a problem because we do know that we have folks who are using performance enhancing drugs or chemicals of some kind. And because Major League Baseball has not really been able to get its hand on what it needs to do to address this issue, you see things like this occur.
It's never
And
really
it is-
fully wanted to get its hands around
But
it.
the problem is-
Well, it does now, and I think it's
does,
gone
and
too
it's
far
trying-
now.
it's
It does
trying to
some
figure
things,
out-
but it never really has its whole heart in the
But
matter.
what it's trying to do now is make the game
Save its
clean.
skin.
But I think it's also trying to make sure that the game is clean. And the issue that it has is oftentimes what people may be taking one day may be fine and legal, and you can purchase it at one of these health food stores.
Hey, Denise.
And the next day it's
Hey,
going to be
Denise,
banned. Yeah.
We're done.
All right. As you could tell from our earlier discussion, a budget can be a real grab bag of provisions, some financial and some more in the policy area. And then there are provisions that strike some people as settling scores. Rick Horowitz is some people, and it's got him thinking. Rick.
It's like one of those old Agatha Christie stories. The room is filled with suspects. And the crime this time? The assault on the Center for Investigative Journalism, which is based on the Madison campus of the University of Wisconsin. Somebody wants to kick the center off campus. Somebody wants to keep university employees, faculty, or anyone else from doing any work with the center. This new law wouldn't apply to other groups, you understand, only to the Center for Investigative Journalism. So which state legislator stuck the knife in under cover of the night? Under cover of a budget bill? Could have been almost anybody. Breaking news, journalists tick off public officials. And not just conservative public officials. Or haven't you noticed the Obama administration going hard lately after reporters on the receiving end of national security leaks? But I'd guess, and I'm only speculating, that it's conservatives who are more often more ticked off at the media than liberals are. And as long as we're stereotyping, let's stipulate that as a general rule, journalists themselves tend to lean liberal rather than conservative, which only makes sense if you think about it. A journalist's job is to gather information, to ask questions. Sometimes it's information that people in powerful positions would rather not share, questions they'd rather not answer. Getting that information anyway, pressing those questions anyway, it takes a certain willingness to buck authority. After all, if you're simply going to wait until people tell you things and then just take down every word they say, you don't go into journalism, you go into stenography or tape recorder repair. Journalism requires a certain disrespect for authority. But who respects authority more than conservatives do? Whose default setting, when it comes to the established institutions of government, business, the military, and the like, is deferential? Conservatives, or at least classic conservatives. Conservatives, that is, before the Tea Party radicals showed up determined to take it all down, to explode the establishment. But classic conservatives might tend to steer clear of journalism careers, that's all. I'm just talking about the probabilities. Maybe somebody could run the numbers sometime. Somebody like the Center for Investigative Journalism.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.